Hello, I'm Super Comic Guru Alucard. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Stephen King Reviews number 24, The Regulators. Today's review is for the 24th book of Stephen King's that I've read, the 6th Bachman book I've read, and the parallel reality twin of Desperation, another one of my favorites. Ghostly Horror by Stephen King's Doppelganger. There's a place in Wentworth, Ohio, where summer is in full swing. It's called Poplar Street. Up until now, it's been a nice place to live. Idling red van around the corner is about to change all that. Let the battle against evil begin. Here comes the Regulators. Call him Bachman or call him King. He hits hard with a white knuckle knockout, a devilishly entertaining yarn of occult mayhem and mordant social commentary, a paragon of action horror, which I think is very accurately describing that. This is actually my sixth favorite, which is why I think that in itself says a lot about where this review is going. As for horror factor, I give it 8 out of 10 because it's wild, crazy, and you really feel for the characters as you're reading it and you fear for them, all of them. The ones who get what they get and the ones that are left around in the carnage and mayhem after the ones who got what they get. You fear for the survivors because you know that those who already got it didn't have a pretty end. For story quality, I gave it 10 out of 10 because I think it's absolutely beautiful and wonderful. The way he delivers the story, the way he has excerpts of things throughout it, the way there's actually a deep lesson to it. There's a beautiful connection between some of the characters, particularly Audrey and her nephew. And that's why, just story quality wise, I think it's wonderfully written. In fact, I would honestly say that's why it's my favorite Bachman book. I think this is Stephen King writing as Richard Bachman at Richard Bachman's best. Now that he was exposed by that point as being Richard Bachman, if he's going to be Richard Bachman, he uses all the strengths that we know for Richard Bachman to his advantage to deliver an equally great parallel universe version of Desperation, which, as many people who know have seen the other reviews, that's actually my third favorite book, even still to this day. And while, yeah, I like it a lot more than The Regulators, the fact that it's number three and The Regulators is number six of my top 10, that's got to show you how good both the books are. In fact, reading one enhanced the experience of the other one for me. So if I was to go back and reread them, I might actually read them both back to back just to see if I still get that same feeling that I got. The atmosphere of taking place out in the desert is kind of why I like Desperation a little more, but he channels that energy into this neighborhood of Ohio, and it does create an amazing, impactful result, which is why it gets such a high rating in that sense. For suspense intensity, I gave it 10 out of 10 because it had me on the edge of my seat and also constantly thinking, what the fuck? Whoa! As I'm reading it, right? So to have an experience like that definitely deserves a perfect 10. For memorable characters, because I really love the characters of Desperation. Not everybody does, but I did. To see them return in alternate versions in different positions of the story, I really love that, and I thought that was so cool. Like, that's why, it's not all my stories get 10 out of 10 for memorable characters, but if I love the characters, then yeah, it gets that. Especially if I love all of them for different reasons, the good and the bad. Now, I loved all the characters from Desperation. So to have them all kind of come back in different roles for the Regulators. That's why I love the memorable characters that much. So, love of the return of Desperation's characters and different roles, which is why I gave it 10 out of 10, to summarize in simple terms. So, all this totals up with horror factor 8 out of 10, story quality 10 out of 10, suspense intensity 10 out of 10, and memorable characters 10 out of 10. So, that gives us an overall rating of, you guessed it, 38 out of 40. Still one of my top 10 favorites, number 6, of course. And my final thoughts would be this is a book that stands out, and it stands alone among all of Stephen King's collection and Richard Bachman books as well. And in my opinion, I actually think it might be one of the most underrated books of Richard Bachman and Stephen King. Like, just overall, it's phenomenal. And I heard people talk about possibly making a mini series. I mean, I actually think the mini series would be better as an attempt to really expand on the story, to really this book, because it's decently long, I do find that even as I was reading it, knowing that, I could picture how each episode would play out if you were to make it a series, and that's why I think a mini series would be perfect. They wanted to do the same thing for Desperation, but because of budget cuts, the studio financing it and everything, they ended up making it just a 2 hour made for TV movie. And I feel like that kind of shortchanged how good Desperation could have been. In fact, that's another one that if anybody was to go back and redo it, I would say take the miniseries approach as well. Don't try to just make it a movie. And with this one, exactly the same thing. I think if it was to be done properly as an adaptation, it would be a fantastic adaptation if it was broken into episodes. Like, as I was reading it, right around the time one of the first characters dies. I could see that being the cliffhanger of that episode. And then the next episode, it kind of leaves where it left off. Like, oh shit, that guy died in the last episode. Now what's going to happen, right? And I could see as I was reading it, like, yeah, that could be where the episode ends. This could be where the next episode starts. Like, I totally was getting ideas myself. I mean, you know what? I know how to write scripts and everything. It's like I just don't have the connections or people as actors or all that stuff to actually make it. But if I was in the position where they would let me direct a mini series like something, I would like if people were like, "Oh, hey, we want you to direct a mini series. What do you want to do?" I would say, "Get me the rights for Stephen King's The Regulators," because as a mini series, I could totally map out how it would be best done, and I think I would do a hell of a good job with it. Not to say that other people couldn't. In fact, if I was gonna say out of somebody that's worked with Stephen King before, I feel like Mick Garris could have done a better job with Desperation if they had made it a miniseries. So that is kind of the name that comes to mind with the Regulators as well, is that I think Mick Garris could do a good job. But once again, I do think that because of the story being so crazy and action packed, it would be better to break it into individual episodes to tell the story. And then that way, by the time we actually get to the final episode, the end of the story, it'll be that much more deep and powerful and moving, as the experience was for me reading it. Anyways, that's my review and my thoughts on The Regulators. Definitely one I highly recommend, and I hope you all enjoyed this review. Until next time, Super Kami Guru Alucard, peace out, and matane.